The great hall of Ravenshollow Manor was bright with candles. There were so many candles that the air felt warm and smelled like honey and beeswax. Silk dresses moved like water across the polished floor. Heels tapped soft notes on the wood. Somewhere, a string quartet played a slow song, and the sound floated up to the painted ceiling, where small, painted angels looked down with sleepy eyes. Maren Holloway stood by the tall window near the back of the room. She was not hiding. She was simply standing where the light did not reach her. She had learned long ago that if a person stood still enough, in the right corner, the world would move around her like a river around a stone. She wore a dress the color of pale tea. It was not a bad dress. It was not a fine one either. It had been her cousin Petra's dress 2 seasons ago, and the lace at the cuffs had been mended twice. Maren did not mind. The dress was clean. The dress was hers now. That was enough. Her gloves were the trouble. The left one had a small pull at the wrist, a tiny thread that would not stay tucked. She lifted her hand and worked the thread back into the seam with her thumb. She did this slowly, as she had done 100 times before. It was her small private routine. When the room felt too big, she fixed her glove. When her aunt said something sharp, she fixed her glove. When her cousin laughed at her in front of the other young ladies, Maren fixed her glove. The thread went back into the seam. She felt the small click of it settling. Her shoulders dropped a little. She could breathe again. Across the room, her cousin Petra was laughing too loudly. Petra always laughed too loudly when there was a man worth catching nearby. Her aunt, Lady Holloway, stood beside Petra like a careful gardener guarding a prize bloom. Their 2 heads, one blonde and one silver, leaned together and whispered. Maren did not need to hear them. She knew what they said. She had heard it her whole life. "Take the plain one," her uncle had said once when she was 7 years old and standing in the hall in her stocking feet. "Take the plain one to the country house. We've no use for her at the wedding." He had laughed when he said it. He had laughed as if it were a small joke between gentlemen, and not a knife sliding between her ribs. She had been 7. She remembered the hall. She remembered the cold floor under her stockings. She remembered the way the words, "no use for her," landed in her chest and stayed there, like a coin dropped down a well that never hit the bottom. She had been 22 for 3 months now. 15 years had passed. The coin was still falling. Maren turned her face to the window. The glass was cold even through the heavy curtains, and she could smell winter coming through the seams, a sharp, clean smell like wet stone and pine. Outside, the gardens were dark. A single lantern hung by the stone path, and its flame shivered. She watched the flame shiver and counted the times it bent left and the times it bent right. Left, left, right. Left, right, right. It was the kind of counting that made the noise of the room go quiet inside her head. "Maren," her cousin's voice. Maren turned. Petra stood 3 steps away, her cheeks pink with wine and warmth. She had her arm linked through her mother's. Both women looked at Maren the way one looks at a stain on a tablecloth one has not yet decided how to remove. "Stand up straighter," Lady Holloway said. "You look like a broken umbrella." "Yes, Aunt." "And do try to smile at someone tonight. We have not brought you here to grow into the wallpaper." "Yes, Aunt." Petra laughed. It was a small, mean laugh, the kind that lived behind a closed mouth. "Mother, leave her be. She is a kind girl. She knows her place." Maren met her cousin's eyes. Petra's eyes were the color of cornflowers, and they were very pretty, and they were very empty. Maren did not say anything. She fixed her glove. The 2 women drifted away. Maren felt the air close behind them like a door. She lifted her eyes again to the room. The musicians were finishing one song and starting another. A pair of older gentlemen were laughing near the punch bowl. A young lady in pink had dropped her fan, and 3 young men were already kneeling to pick it up. The room was full. The room was bright. The room was, as it had always been, Somewhere Maren was permitted to stand, but not invited to enter. And then the doors at the far end of the hall opened, and the air in the room changed. It was a small change. Maren only noticed it because she had been standing still for so long that she could feel the way candle flames moved when a draught came in. The flames near the door bent. A footman straightened his back. A woman near the punch bowl tucked a curl behind her ear without knowing she had done it. The conversation did not stop. The music did not stop. But something underneath the room, some quiet current, shifted. The Duke of Ashforth had come in. Maren had never seen him before. She had heard his name. Everyone had heard his name. The Duke of Ashforth was the kind of man whose name travelled into rooms before he did, and stayed in rooms after he left. He had inherited the title 3 years ago, after his elder brother had died of a fever in Italy. He was said to be hard. He was said to be quiet. He was said to be looking for a wife, and every mother in 3 counties had been polishing her daughter for the chance. Maren looked at him because everyone was looking at him. She did not expect to be struck by him. She had been told he was handsome and had decided in advance not to be impressed. He was not handsome, not in the way she had been told men ought to be handsome. His nose had been broken once and had not set straight. His mouth was a hard, straight line. His hair was dark and slightly too long, as if he had forgotten to have it cut. He was tall, but he did not stand tall the way some men did, with their chest pushed out like a bird showing off its feathers. He stood the way a stone stood, settled. He took up the space he took up, and he did not ask the room's permission for any of it. A waiter offered him a glass of wine. He shook his head once. The waiter melted away. Lord Hartwell, who was the host of the ball, came forward to greet him. The Duke nodded. He shook the man's hand. He answered some question. Maren could not hear any of it from her place by the window. She watched his mouth move, and she watched the way Lord Hartwell laughed too loudly at something the Duke had not meant as a joke. Lady Hartwell came next, then her daughters, then 3 other mothers with 3 other daughters. The Duke greeted them all with the same small nod. He did not smile. He did not refuse to smile. His face did not change. He was being polite, but he was being polite the way a wall was polite. You could lean on him, but he was not going to lean back. Maren watched all of this and felt nothing in particular. She had no part in any of it. She was 22 and unmarried, and she had a dowry the size of a teacup, and her cousin was the prettier one, and her aunt would make sure of it. She watched the Duke the way she might have watched a play, interested, but at a distance. And then he turned his head. He turned his head toward the back of the room. He turned his head toward the curtain. He turned his head toward her. Maren froze. She did not move. She did not look away. He was too far across the room for her to see his eyes clearly. She could only see that they were dark. But she felt them rest on her, the way one feels the sun touch the back of one's neck on a cold morning. He looked at her for a long second. Then he looked away. Maren's heart did one strange beat and then went back to its work. She told herself she had imagined it. He had not been looking at her. He had been looking at the curtain behind her, or at the window, or at the painted angel on the ceiling above her head. There was no reason for a duke to look at Maren Holloway. There never had been. She lifted her hand and fixed her glove again. He was making his way through the room. He stopped to speak to an older lord by the fireplace. He stopped to greet a dowager in a purple turban. He nodded to a man Maren did not know. He took 2 steps. He stopped to listen to a younger man who was speaking with great seriousness about a horse. He nodded again. He moved on. He was moving toward her. Maren felt this only because the room felt it. The conversations near her grew quieter. The young ladies who had been arranged carefully along his path lifted their chins and straightened their backs. Her aunt, 10 steps to Maren's left, turned to make sure Petra's curls were in place. The Duke walked past Petra without stopping. He walked past her aunt without stopping. He walked past 3 other young women who had been positioned by their mothers exactly where he ought to stop, and he stopped at none of them. He stopped in front of Marin. The candles seemed to bend, or perhaps that was only her vision. The string quartet was still playing, but it sounded far away, as if from another room. He bowed. It was a small bow, but it was a real one. "Miss Holloway," he said. Marin's hand was still on the cuff of her glove. She forgot to lower it. She stared at him. "How do you know my name?" It came out before she could stop it. Her aunt would have hit her over the head with a fan if her aunt had been close enough to hear. One did not ask a duke such questions. One curtsied and smiled and waited to be told what to do. The duke's mouth moved at one corner. It was not quite a smile. It was the smaller cousin of a smile, the one a man wore when he had decided to be amused, but had not yet decided to show it. "I asked," he said. "You asked whom?" "The footman at the door." "Why?" He looked at her for another long moment. Up close, his eyes were the color of strong tea. They had small lines at the corners, the kind that come from squinting at horizons. They were tired eyes. They were also very awake. "Because," he said, "you were the only person in the room who did not turn to look when I came in." Marin did not know what to say to that. She knew she ought to say something graceful. She had been taught 100 graceful things to say. They had all left her head. "I was looking at the lantern outside," she said. "I was counting how many times the flame bent in the wind." She heard her own words. She wanted to take them back. They were the wrong words. They were the words of a girl who counted flames in windows because the room was too loud. They were not the words of a young lady at a ball who was being addressed by a duke. But the duke did not laugh. He did not look at her with confusion. He looked at her with a kind of careful, quiet attention that made her feel suddenly, strangely, that she had been seen. "And how many times did it bend?" he asked. She blinked. "Sir?" "The flame, left or right, how many times each?" Marin swallowed. 12 left, 9 right." "The wind is from the west, then?" "Yes." He nodded once, as if this were a perfectly ordinary thing to discuss with a young woman at her uncle's friend's winter ball. Then he straightened, and the small smile that had been hiding at the corner of his mouth disappeared. "Will you walk with me?" he said. The room behind him went very still. Marin could feel her aunt's eyes burning a hole in the back of her head. She could feel Petra's mouth fall open. She could feel every mother in the room turn at the same time, the way a flock of starlings turns at the same time, all together, like one creature with many wings. "I do not dance well," Marin said quietly. "I did not ask you to dance." "Oh." He waited. He did not press. He did not offer her his arm. He simply stood there waiting, as if the answer to the question was a small thing, and not the loudest moment of her entire life. Marin took a breath. The air smelled of beeswax and wine and something else, something underneath, rain perhaps, and wood smoke, and the clean, sharp scent of a coat that had been outside not long ago. The scent was coming from him. "Yes," she said. She did not know why she said it. She had meant to say no. He offered her his arm. She put her hand on his sleeve. The wool of his coat was finer than anything she had ever touched. Under it, his arm was solid as a doorframe. They walked. The room watched. The music kept playing. He led her not to the floor but to a side corridor where the candles were fewer and the air was cooler. There was a long row of windows that looked out onto a stone terrace. He stopped there. He did not turn to face her. He looked out the window. "Forgive me," he said. "I dislike crowded rooms." "Then why come?" "It is expected." "That is not a reason." He looked at her then. He looked at her properly. His eyes moved over her face once, quickly, the way a man might check a map to make sure he had read it right. "No," he said, "it is not, but it will do." She did not answer. She turned her face to the glass. The terrace beyond was dark. Snow had begun to fall, very lightly, the kind of snow that was more idea than weather. The flakes touched the stone and disappeared. "You are watching the snow," he said. "It is easier than watching the room." "Yes." There was a silence. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that sat down beside you, like a cat, and did not need anything from you. "You will be talked about now," he said. "I have caused it." "I know. Does that trouble you?" She thought about it. She thought about her aunt's face. She thought about Petra's mouth falling open. She thought about all the years she had stood in corners, fixing her glove, hoping no one would notice her, hoping no one would speak to her, hoping to be left alone in the small, safe space she had built for herself out of silence and tea-colored dresses. "They have always talked about me," she said. "They have only ever talked about how little I matter. Tonight, they will talk about something else. I do not know if it is better, but it is different." He turned his head and looked at her again. It was a long look. She did not look away. "You are very honest," he said. "I am very tired," she said. He laughed. It was the smallest possible laugh, more a breath than a sound, but it was a laugh. "Miss Holloway," he said, "I do not know you, but I would like to." "Why?" "Because you counted the flame." She did not know what to do with that answer. It made no sense. It made every sense. She fixed her glove. He saw her do it. His eyes dropped to her hand. He did not say anything about it. He simply noted it, the way a man notes the weather, and looked back at her face. "I should return you to your aunt," he said. "You should." He offered her his arm again. She took it. They walked back into the great hall together, and the room moved around them like water moving around a stone. For 2 weeks after the ball, Maren waited for the world to go back to normal. She thought it would. She thought the Duke of Ashforth had been bored at a tedious gathering, and had spoken to her because she was the strangest object in the room, and he had wanted to see what she would say. She thought he would forget her by morning. He did not forget her by morning. A card came on Tuesday. It was a plain card. It said only that he hoped Miss Holloway and her family were well, and that he would call at 3 on Thursday if it was not an inconvenience. Her aunt read the card twice. Then she read it a third time. Then she set it down on the breakfast table and stared at Maren the way one stares at a kettle that has suddenly begun to whistle when one had not known one had put it on the stove. "What did you do?" Lady Holloway said. "Nothing." "You must have done something." "I counted a flame." "Do not be impertinent." Petra was not at breakfast. Petra had taken to her room with a headache. Petra had been having a great many headaches since the ball. On Thursday at 3, the Duke came. He sat in the front parlour for exactly 35 minutes. He drank 1 cup of tea which he did not finish. He spoke very little. He asked Lady Holloway about her gardens. He asked Maren what she had been reading. Maren said she had been reading a book about Roman roads. Lady Holloway turned pink in patches. The Duke nodded as if a book about Roman roads were exactly what a respectable young lady ought to be reading on a Thursday, and asked Maren which road was her favourite. Maren said the Via Appia, because it ran along the sea. The Duke said he had walked part of it once. He asked if she would like to hear about it. She said yes. He spoke for 4 minutes about the Via Appia. He spoke quietly. He did not perform. He told her about the way the stones still showed the ruts of old carts. He told her about the umbrella pines. He told her about the smell of the sea coming up over the hills. Maren listened. When he stopped, she found she had been leaning forward in her chair. Lady Holloway looked from the Duke to her niece and back again. Her mouth was a thin, hard line. The Duke set down his cup. He stood. He bowed. He said he would call again next week if it was not an inconvenience. Lady Holloway said it was not an inconvenience. The Duke left. The front door had not finished closing before Lady Holloway turned on Maren. "You will not see him again." "He said he would call." "You will be unavailable." "Aunt, he is making sport of you. Do you understand? Men of his rank do not court girls like you. He is amusing himself. When he tires of it, you will be ruined. and we will all be ruined with you. Do you understand me?" Marin looked at her hands. The thread at her wrist had come loose again. She tucked it back. "Yes, Aunt." She did not, in fact, understand, but she had learned long ago that saying, "Yes, Aunt," was the fastest way to be left alone. The Duke called again the following Thursday. Lady Holloway told the butler to say the family was not at home. The Duke nodded politely and went away. The Duke called again on Saturday. Lady Holloway told the butler the same thing. The Duke nodded politely and went away. The Duke wrote a letter. He addressed it to Lady Holloway. He said he understood the family was very busy at this time of year. He hoped Miss Marin Holloway might be permitted to walk in the public gardens on Monday afternoon at 2 in the company of her cousin, and that he, the Duke, might happen to be walking there at the same time, by coincidence. He said he would not press the matter further if his presence was unwelcome. Lady Holloway read this letter 4 times. Then she walked into the morning room and threw it into the fire. But she let Marin go to the gardens on Monday. She sent Petra as the chaperone. She said if Petra did her part, the Duke would shift his attention to the prettier cousin where it belonged, and Marin could be returned to the wallpaper where she belonged. The gardens were cold. The trees had lost almost all their leaves. The sky was the grey of pewter. Marin and Petra walked the long gravel path. Petra was bright-eyed. Petra had put rouge on her cheeks. Petra walked just slightly ahead of Marin, which made Marin the chaperone, even though the arrangement had been the other way around. The Duke was on the path. He was alone. He carried no walking stick. He wore a long dark coat with the collar turned up. His cheeks were pink from the cold. When he saw them, he stopped. He bowed. "Miss Holloway, Miss Holloway." Petra dipped a curtsy so deep her knee nearly touched the ground. "Your Grace, what a happy surprise." "Indeed." He waited. Petra did not move. The Duke turned to Marin. "Miss Marin Holloway, would you walk with me a small way? Your cousin may follow." It was very politely phrased. It was also very clearly not a request that could be refused. Petra's smile froze. Marin saw it freeze. She watched it harden into a thing that looked like a smile, but was made of glass. Marin stepped forward and took the Duke's arm. They walked. Petra trailed behind, 4 steps back, then 5, then 6. Marin could feel her cousin's eyes on her back like 2 small hot coals. "She does not like me very much," Marin said quietly. "No." "She is angry that you spoke to me." "Yes." "She thinks you ought to have spoken to her." "I am aware of what she thinks." He said it without unkindness. He said it as he might have said that he was aware of the time, or aware that the wind was from the east. It was a fact. He did not seem inclined to argue with it. They walked in silence for a long moment. The gravel crunched. A blackbird called somewhere in the bare branches above them. Marin could smell the cold earth, and beneath it, the dry, sweet smell of dead leaves. "Your Grace," she said. "Yes?" "Why are you doing this?" He did not answer at once. He walked 3 more steps. Then he stopped. He turned to face her. He looked down at her, and his face was very serious. "I do not perform, Miss Holloway. I do not flatter. I do not court women I do not intend to know. I do not have time for it, and I do not enjoy it. If I am here, it is because I have chosen to be here. Do you understand?" "No." "Then I will say it more plainly. I am not amusing myself with you. My aunt thinks you are. Your aunt is wrong." Marin looked up at him. The wind moved his hair across his forehead. He did not lift his hand to push it back. He simply stood there, in the cold, with his serious face and his tired, tea-colored eyes, and waited. "I do not understand what you want from me," she said. "I do not want anything from you, not yet. I would like to know you. That is what I want now. Later, perhaps, I will want more, but that is later." And if I never want more? Then I will go away. Marin stared at him. You would just go away? Yes. You are a duke. I am also a man. She did not know what to say to that. She turned her face to the path. The gravel was very white in the grey light. Behind them, Petra had stopped walking and was pretending to look at a hedge. I cannot decide if you are a fool or the most honest man I have ever met, Marin said. Perhaps both. She laughed. It was a small, surprised laugh. She covered her mouth with her hand. She had not laughed in front of anyone in a long time, and she was not sure she remembered how the sound was supposed to come out. The Duke did not laugh, but the small smile, the one that lived at the corner of his mouth, came back. Miss Holloway, he said, may I ask you a question? Yes. Why do you fix your glove? Marin looked down at her hands. The thread at her left wrist was loose again. She had been working it back into the seam without thinking, even as they walked. It is a habit, she said. It is more than a habit. She was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved through the bare branches. Somewhere far away, a carriage rattled over a stone bridge. When I was 7, she said, my uncle said in front of a room full of people that I was of no use. He laughed when he said it. After that, when rooms got loud, I would fix my glove. It was something I could do that no one would notice. It was something that was mine. It kept me where I was supposed to be. She did not look at him as she said it. She did not want to see his face. There was a long silence. Thank you, he said quietly, for telling me that. You are welcome. He was wrong, you know. My uncle? Yes. It does not matter whether he was wrong. He said it. People heard it. It is true now whether or not it was ever true. No, the Duke said. That is not how truth works. She looked up at him then. His face was hard, but the hardness was not aimed at her. The hardness was aimed at her uncle, a man the Duke had never met and would never meet. And the hardness was old and settled and entirely real. He offered her his arm again. They walked on. Petra followed at a distance. When they parted at the gate, the Duke bowed. He said he hoped to see her again. Marin said she hoped so too, before she remembered that she was supposed to say something graceful and non-committal. Petra heard her. Petra would tell their aunt. Marin did not care. The third meeting was in a bookseller's shop on Charlotte Street. The Duke had not arranged it. He had simply been there when Marin and Petra came in out of the rain. Marin saw him at the back, by the shelf on natural history. He had a book open in his hands. He was reading the way some men ate, slowly, with attention, not in a hurry. He looked up when the bell over the door rang. His eyes found Marin the way water finds the lowest place in a field. He nodded. He did not approach. He went back to his book. Petra wanted to leave. Marin said she wanted to look at the new poetry. Petra rolled her eyes. Petra went to the front of the shop to look at fashion plates. Marin walked to the back. She stood at the shelf next to the Duke. She pretended to read the spine of a book about wildflowers. Did you finish the book about Roman roads? He asked quietly without looking up. Yes. And? It was very good. I am reading one about the canals of Venice now. Have you been to Venice? No. Would you like to? Yes. He turned a page in his book. He still did not look at her. Miss Holloway, your cousin is watching us in the mirror above the door. I know. She will report this. I know. Are you frightened? Marin thought about it. She thought about her aunt's hard mouth. She thought about her uncle's old laughter. She thought about the years and years of fixing her glove in the corner of rooms. No, she said. I am not frightened. I am tired. Of? Of being told who I am by people who have never bothered to look. The Duke closed his book. He put it back on the shelf. He turned to her at last. Then do not be told, he said. Look at yourself. Decide. The rest is noise." He bowed. He walked past her to the front of the shop. He nodded to Petra. He left. It rained harder. Maren walked home in the rain because Petra refused to share the umbrella. She did not mind the rain. Her face was already wet. The fourth meeting was the one that broke everything. It was the engagement party for Lady Hartwell's eldest daughter, who was marrying a baron from somewhere in the north. Half the county had been invited. The Holloways had been invited. The Duke had been invited. Maren wore the tea-coloured dress because she had no other. The hall was full. The music was loud. Petra was in lavender silk and her hair was full of small white flowers. Their aunt had spent £6 on Petra's hair. The Duke came in. He nodded to the host. He nodded to the host's wife. He looked across the room. He found Maren at once by the window, fixing her glove. He started across the room toward her. Petra moved. Maren did not see her cousin move. She only saw suddenly that Petra was beside her, and that Petra's hand was on her arm, and that Petra was speaking very loudly to a circle of women who had gathered nearby. "Oh, the poor dear, she does try," Petra was saying. "But really, Mother says it is a kindness to remind her sometimes. You know she has not the looks for the front of a room. She borrows my dresses, you see. This one she is wearing now? 2 years ago it was mine. Look closely and you can see where the lace was mended. She thinks no one notices. We all notice. We are simply too polite to say." The women near them laughed. They laughed the small, mean laugh, the one Maren knew very well. One woman covered her mouth with her gloved hand. Another looked Maren up and down and lifted one eyebrow. The Duke was 3 steps away. He had heard. Maren could see in his face that he had heard. She did not cry. She did not even flush. She had been here before. She had been here all her life. She knew the shape of this room and the weight of this moment and the exact angle of her cousin's smile. She lifted her hand. She fixed her glove. Then she turned to Petra. She did not raise her voice. She did not look angry. She looked tired and clear and almost kind. "You are right," she said. "It is your dress. Thank you for the loan of it. I will return it tomorrow. I have no further need of it." Petra blinked. Maren stepped back from her cousin. She made the smallest possible curtsy to the circle of women. "Excuse me," she said. She walked out. She did not run. She did not hurry. She walked the length of the great hall with her chin level and her hands loose at her sides. Every person she passed turned to watch her. She did not turn to watch any of them. She walked past her aunt, who had risen from her chair with her mouth open. She walked past the Duke, who had stopped where he stood. She walked past Lord Hartwell, who looked confused. She walked through the great double doors and into the front hall and out the front door and down the stone steps and into the cold. The footman at the door did not stop her. They knew better than to stop a lady who walked like that. It was very cold outside. She had not collected her cloak. She did not turn back for it. There was a stone bench near the front gate. She sat on it. She was perfectly composed. She placed her hands in her lap. She looked up at the stars. The stars were very bright. The cold had made them sharper than usual. She picked one and stared at it until her eyes watered, and then she told herself the water was from the cold. She heard the door open behind her. She heard footsteps on the steps. She did not turn. A heavy coat came down around her shoulders. It smelled of rain and wood smoke. It was very warm. The Duke sat down on the bench beside her. He did not touch her. He looked up at the stars. "Which one are you looking at?" he said. "The brightest one." "That is the one over the chimney?" "Yes." "That is not a star. That is a planet. Venus, I believe." "Oh." There was a long silence. She could feel his shoulder beside hers, not touching but close. "Miss Holloway," he said, "may I ask you something?" "Yes." "What did you mean when you said you would return the dress tomorrow? You said you had no further need of it." Maren was quiet for a long time. She watched her own breath cloud in the cold air. She watched it fade. "I am not going back," she said. Not to that house. I have a small inheritance from my mother. It is not much. It is enough to keep me in lodgings for a year if I am careful. I have been careful with the idea of it for a long time. I think tonight was the night I always knew was coming. You will leave them? Yes. Tonight? Tonight. He nodded. He did not argue. He did not try to talk her out of it. He did not offer to do anything for her. He simply sat with her in the cold and looked up at Venus over the chimney. After a long time, he said, "May I drive you?" "I have not arranged a carriage." "I have." "Where will you take me?" "Wherever you tell me to go." She turned her face toward him at last. He was looking up at the stars still, his profile sharp against the dark. His breath was a small cloud at his mouth. "Why?" she said. He did not answer at once. He took his time. He was a man who took his time. "Because," he said, "you walked out of that room without saying a word. You did not weep. You did not shout. You did the most precise thing I have ever seen anyone do in a room full of people. You curtsied. You thanked her. And you left." He paused. "I cannot stop thinking about it. It was nothing. It was the opposite of nothing." She did not know what to say. She watched her breath. "You are cold," he said. "Will you come into the carriage at least? We can sit there. You do not have to decide where to go yet." "All right?" He stood. He offered his hand. She took it. His hand was warm and dry. He helped her down the path to where his carriage waited. The horses stood very still in the cold. Their breath made small clouds. He opened the door. She climbed in. He climbed in after her. He sat across from her. He did not sit beside her. He had been careful about that all along. The inside of the carriage was warm. There was a heavy rug over the seat. He pulled it across her lap without asking. Her hands were shaking, she realized. She had not known they were shaking. "Miss Holloway?" "Yes." "I do not want to push you, but there is a small house in town that belongs to my late aunt. It has stood empty for 2 years. There is a housekeeper there, an old woman, a friend of my mother's, very kind. The house is small, but it is warm. There is a fire laid every night, even though no one stays there. If you wished, you could go there tonight. No one would ask any questions. The housekeeper would think you were a niece of mine. By morning we could send word to whatever family you have left, or to your solicitor, or to no one. You may stay 1 night or 1 year. There would be no obligation of any kind." Maren stared at him. "You have offered this very quickly," she said. "I have been thinking about it for 2 weeks." "You have been what?" "I knew, 2 weeks ago, that this night would come. I did not know what shape it would take, but I knew the shape of your aunt's house, and I knew the shape of your cousin, and I knew the shape of your face when you stood at the window in the great hall, counting the flame in the lantern. I knew you would not stay there forever. I wanted to have a place ready for you, in case you needed one." Maren put her face in her hands. She did not cry. She just covered her face. She did not want him to see whatever was on it. After a long moment, she lowered her hands. "You hardly know me." "I know enough." "You cannot know enough in 2 weeks. I know that you notice the wind direction by counting a flame. I know that you read books about Roman roads because you cannot go to Rome. I know that when your cousin tried to humiliate you in front of half the county, you thanked her for the dress and walked out of the room with more dignity than any duchess I have ever met. I know that you do not perform. I know that when I asked you why you fixed your glove, you told me the truth, even though the truth made you small in your own eyes." He paused. "I do not need 10 years, Miss Holloway. I have lived long enough to know what is rare." She stared at him. The lamp inside the carriage was low and gold. It made one side of his face soft and left the other in shadow. His eyes were very dark. "You are mad," she said. "Probably. Take me to your aunt's house, the empty one. I will stay 1 night. I will decide in the morning." "Yes." He rapped twice on the roof of the carriage with his knuckle. The driver above made a small sound to the horses. The carriage began to move. The old housekeeper at the small townhouse was, as the Duke had said, kind. Her name was Mrs. Tate. She was small and round, and her hair was the colour of fresh snow. She did not ask a single question. She made Maren tea. She gave her a room with a fire already lit. She put a hot brick wrapped in flannel at the foot of the bed. She closed the door behind her and went away. Maren lay in the bed for a long time. She did not sleep. She watched the firelight on the ceiling and listened to the small ticking of a clock somewhere downstairs. She thought about her aunt's house. She thought about Petra's small, mean laugh. She thought about the Duke sitting beside her on the cold stone bench, looking up at Venus over the chimney. She slept at last. In the morning, Mrs. Tate brought her tea and bread and a small letter on a silver tray. The letter was from the Duke. It said, "I will not call today. The house is yours for as long as you wish it. If you need anything, send word and I will come. If you need nothing, I will wait. A." Maren read it twice. She folded it carefully. She put it under her pillow. She stayed in the house. She stayed 3 days. Mrs. Tate fed her. The fire was lit every morning. No one knocked at the door except a boy with bread. On the 4th day, Maren wrote a letter to her aunt. She wrote it carefully. She said she had taken lodgings of her own and would be sending a man for her things on Saturday. She said she did not wish to discuss the matter. She said she wished her aunt and her cousin every good thing in the years to come. She did not say where she was. The man came for her things on Saturday. Lady Holloway tried to question him. He answered nothing. He took the small trunk and left. The dress was not in the trunk. Maren had wrapped it separately. She sent it back to Petra by a different boy, with a small card that said only, "With thanks, M." She heard nothing from the Holloway house after that. The Duke did not call for a week. Then he called for half an hour, in the front parlour of the small house, with Mrs. Tate present at her sewing. They did not speak of the engagement party. They spoke of canals in Venice. He had been there twice. He told her about a glassblower in Murano who made small blue birds out of fire. He said he would send her one if she liked. She said she would like that very much. The bluebird arrived 3 days later, wrapped in straw, with a small tag tied to its foot. The tag said, "It does not sing, but it does not need to. A." She put the bird on the mantel. Winter became spring. The Duke called once a week, never more. He did not press. He did not propose. He brought books. He brought one cutting from his own gardens, a small rose with very dark leaves, which Mrs. Tate planted in a pot by the kitchen window. He stayed half an hour each time. He left. In April, Mrs. Tate told Maren a story. She told it quietly, while she was darning a stocking by the window. She said that the Duke, 3 years ago, had taken in the orphaned daughter of a man who had once been a footman in his father's house. The girl had been 12. The Duke had paid for her schooling. He had found her a position with a respectable family in Bath when she was old enough. He had never mentioned it to anyone. Mrs. Tate only knew because the girl had written to her once, asking after the Duke's health, and saying she lit a candle for him every year on the anniversary of her father's death. "He does not speak of it," Mrs. Tate said. "He would be cross with me for telling you. But you ought to know, child. You ought to know what kind of man he is when no one is watching." Maren did not say anything. She looked at the small blue bird on the mantel. In May, the Duke came to call and asked Maren if she would walk with him in the gardens at his country estate, with Mrs. Tate as her chaperone. She said yes. They went. The gardens at Ashforth were old and wild and beautiful. There was an avenue of lime trees that smelled in May like honey. There was a fountain with a stone fish that no longer worked. There was a kitchen garden with rosemary as tall as Maren's waist. He walked her through all of it. He pointed out a window on the 2nd floor of the house and said it had been his mother's room. He pointed out a tree and said his brother had broken his arm falling out of it. He told her the names of the gardeners. He introduced her to the housekeeper. He did all this slowly, like a man laying out a map. At the end of the walk, by the gate, he stopped. "Miss Holloway," he said. "Yes. I do not want to ask you a question I am not ready to ask, but I want to tell you something." "All right." "This place has been waiting for someone, for a long time. I did not know it until you walked out of that room without weeping. Now I cannot stop seeing you in this garden. I am sorry if that is too much. I do not say it to hurry you. I say it because you should know." Maren looked at the lime trees. She listened to the bees in the lime trees. She smelled the honey smell. "I do not need to be hurried," she said quietly. "I have not been hurried in my life. I have been left to grow into the wallpaper. I should like for once to make a choice slowly. Yes, but I should like also to make it." He waited. She turned to him. The wind moved his hair. He did not push it back. "When you are ready to ask me," she said, "ask me." "Yes, and I will give you my answer." "Yes." He bowed. They went back to the house. Mrs. Tate, who had been pretending to look at a hedge, came along behind them. It was the last week of June when it happened. The week before, Petra had become engaged to a banker's son from Bristol. Lady Holloway had written to Maren, the first letter she had sent in 7 months. The letter was very short. The letter said that the family hoped Maren would consider attending the engagement dinner, as it would look strange to the neighbours if she did not, and as the Holloways had been, after all, the only family she had known. Maren took the letter to the Duke that Thursday. He read it. He set it down on the small table between them. He looked at her. "What do you wish to do?" he said. "I do not want to go alone." "Then do not." "Will you come with me?" He nodded once. He did not need to say anything else. The engagement dinner was at the Holloway house. The same drawing room, the same chairs, the same painting of her aunt's spaniel over the mantel, the same smell of furniture polish and the dry, faintly sour smell of old rosewater. Maren wore a new dress. It was not borrowed. It was pale blue silk with very small pearl buttons. The Duke had not bought it for her. She had bought it herself, with the money her mother had left her, in a shop she had walked into alone. The shop girl had called her Madam. Maren had liked the word Madam very much. She came in on the Duke's arm. The room went silent. It went silent the way a room goes silent when a candle is suddenly snuffed. A small sound, then nothing. Petra was standing by the fireplace. Petra's mouth opened. Lady Holloway, who had been pouring sherry, stopped with the decanter in mid-air. The banker's son from Bristol, who had never seen Maren before, looked confused. The aunt and uncle from the north, who had come for the engagement, turned their heads slowly. Maren did not look at any of them. She looked at her aunt. She made the small curtsy she had learned at the age of 7, in the same hall, in the same stocking feet. "Aunt," she said, "may I present His Grace the Duke of Ashforth?" The Duke bowed. He bowed correctly and not deeply. He held Lady Holloway's eyes for one long second longer than was polite. "Madam," he said. Lady Holloway's mouth worked. Nothing came out. Then she said, Your Grace, we are honoured." "Miss Maren is my guest this evening," the Duke said quietly. "I trust that will not inconvenience you." No, of course not." The dinner that followed was the strangest dinner Maren had ever sat through. The Duke did not perform. He did not announce anything. He simply was there. He sat at her right hand. He passed her the bread. He asked her quietly whether the soup was to her liking. He answered every question put to him with perfect courtesy and no warmth. He laughed at none of Petra's jokes. He looked at none of the daughters who had been seated, very strategically, on his other side. After the soup, Lady Holloway leaned across the table. "And how did you come to know our Maren, Your Grace?" The Duke set down his spoon. He looked at his hostess for a long moment. "At a ball last winter," he said. "She was the only person in the room who did not turn to look when I came in." The table went very quiet. She was counting a flame in a lantern, he went on. I asked her how many times it had bent. She told me. She told me precisely. I have not been able to stop thinking about her since. He paused. He looked down the table at Maren. I have spent the last 7 months falling in love with her. The silence stretched. He did not look away from her. She did not look away from him. The candles between them shivered. And tonight, he said, his voice still quiet, still level, I had hoped to ask her something in private, but your kind invitation has given me a chance to say it before the people who raised her. So I will. He turned to Maren. He set down his napkin. He pushed back his chair very slightly. He did not kneel. He did not need to. Miss Maren Holloway, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? It was not a question. It was a fact. He had said he announced facts. The room did not breathe. Maren looked at him. She felt the years and years of small, private routines folding shut behind her like a book she would not need to open again. She felt her uncle's old laughter, the laughter that had said, "Take the plain one, I have no use for her." And she felt that laughter dry up and blow away, like ash off a cold fire. She did not cry. She did not even smile, not at first. She lifted her hand. She fixed her glove. She did it slowly. She did it as her own small, private goodbye to the girl in the corner of every room. Then she lowered her hand. "Yes," she said. "Thank you," he said. He took her hand. He did not kiss it. He simply held it. His thumb moved once across her knuckles, very gently. Lady Holloway sat down hard in her chair. Petra had not closed her mouth. The banker's son from Bristol said very quietly, "Goodness." The dinner went on. The Duke spoke to Lady Holloway about her gardens. He praised the pheasant. He thanked the cook by name. When the meal was over, he rose. He bowed to his hostess. He thanked her for the kindness of the invitation. He offered Maren his arm. They walked out together. Maren did not look back. She had not looked back in a long time. In the carriage, she sat across from him. He had been careful about that all these months. Tonight, she moved. She crossed the small space between the seats. She sat beside him. She put her hand on his arm. He did not move at once. Then he turned his head. He looked down at her hand on his sleeve. "You did not need to do this in front of them," she said quietly. "You did not need to ask me there. You could have asked me anywhere." "I know." "Then why?" He was quiet for a long moment. The lamps inside the carriage made his face soft on one side and shadowed on the other, the same as that first night. "Because they made you small," he said. "Because they were the room where it began. I wanted the room where it ended to be the same room." She put her head against his shoulder. She had not known she was going to. He went very still. Then he lifted his arm and put it around her. He did it carefully, as if she were something he might break. He did not break her. "I love you," she said. She had not known she was going to say that either. "I know," he said. "You do not say it back." "I have been saying it. I have said it every Thursday since November. You only just heard it now." She laughed. It was a small breath of a laugh. It was a real one. She fixed her glove one more time. The thread at her wrist had come loose. She tucked it back. He watched her do it. He did not say anything. He did not need to. He had said everything. A year later, in early summer, the dining room at Ashforth was warm and bright. The long windows were open. The smell of lime blossom came in on the wind, and underneath it, the green smell of cut grass. A blackbird sang somewhere in the garden. The clock on the mantel ticked softly. On the long table, a vase of pale roses leaned a little to one side. Maren came in from the garden with mud on the hem of her dress. She did not notice it. She had been pulling weeds with the head gardener. There was a smudge of dirt on her cheek. Her hair, which she had once kept very tightly pinned, was coming down at the back. The Duke was already in his chair at the head of the table. He looked up when she came in. He looked at the mud on her hem. He looked at the dirt on her cheek. He looked at her hair coming down. "You look like a broken umbrella," he said softly. "I know." "Come here." She went to him. He stood. He brushed the dirt from her cheek with his thumb. He did it slowly. He took his time. He was a man who took his time. On the mantel, in pride of place, sat a small blue bird made of glass. Beside it, in a small silver frame, was a card with 3 words in Maren's handwriting: "With thanks. M." She had asked him once why he had kept it. He had said because it was the moment he had known. She had asked him known what? He had said, "Known that you were not the plain one. Known that you were the only one." He pulled out her chair. She sat. He sat beside her, not across. He had stopped sitting across from her on the 2nd day of their marriage. He poured her tea. She lifted her hand to take the cup. The lace at her left cuff was perfectly tucked. She had not fixed her glove in a very long time. She had not needed to. Outside, the blackbird sang again. The lime trees moved in the small wind. Somewhere upstairs, a door opened and a maid laughed at something. The house breathed around them, warm and lived in, the way a house breathes when it has finally been chosen by someone who means to stay. Maren lifted her cup. She caught his eye over the rim. He raised one eyebrow, the smallest possible question. She smiled. He had said once that he did not perform. He still did not. He simply reached across the small space between them and put his hand over hers, and held it there, while the tea grew cold, and the blackbird sang, and the lime blossom came in on the wind, and the room, for the first time in either of their lives, felt